we're going to go ahead and move right into the next section. And this is from, a month ago, the American Valor Salute Our Heroes event, in which our very own Burley Smith with Kimchi One appeared at that. So, Doreen, go ahead.
When American Valor returns, an incredible story of American humanity during the Korean War.
Welcome back to American Valor, a salute to our heroes. To introduce a truly incredible story from the Christmas season 75 years ago, please welcome back Charlie Weber, an actor, producer, and the USO's Senior Global Ambassador, Wilmer Valderrama.
After World War II, Americans wanted nothing more than to move on from war, to move on from destruction and sacrifice. And yet, young Americans would be called upon once more to Korea, to a fight overlooked by history, to a forgotten war.
Not long ago, the names of 43,808 fallen heroes were finally engraved into the Korean War Veterans Memorial on the National Mall. No longer will their sacrifice remain forgotten. 75 years ago, November and December of 1950, we witnessed terrible battle in one of the legendary stands in Marine Corps history. And then, at Christmas, a miracle. In one of the greatest humanitarian missions in all of history, sharing the story is Michael Keaton.
15 September 1950. In a masterstroke of war, forces under Douglas MacArthur land behind enemy lines at the South Korean port of Incheon, near Seoul. In a moment, the tide of the Korean War had changed. The mood turned exuberant. I regard all of North Korea open for our military operations, MacArthur declared. The mission to save South Korea achieved, MacArthur ordered his forces north to the border with China. But the Americans were not alone. From Manchuria, the Chinese army secretly crossed into country. Ordered to advance, a force led by 25,000 U.S. Marines marched deep into the mountains. They dug in astride a man-made lake known as Chosin Reservoir. It was a trap. Waiting in the mountains were 120,000 Chinese soldiers. 27 November. As the sun set over the ridgeline, 170 men of Easy Company, 7th Marines, held a hilltop position at the northwest tip of the spear. After midnight, in the distance, a chilling echo, thousands of feet crunching through snow. Then an incredible cacophony, drums, crashing cymbals, the bleating of shepherd's horns. A lunatic's delight, a Marine described the sound. Star shells burst in the sky, revealing the terrifying sight below. A full battalion of charging Chinese soldiers. The Marines opened fire, barrels of their weapons glowing orange, tracers lighting the hilltop. Chinese soldiers fell in rows. Easy Company's wounded piled up, weapons jammed in the extreme cold. The fight turned desperate. If Easy was overrun, the entire ridgeline might fall. Calling for help, Captain Walt Phillips rallied his men. "This is Easy Company," he declared. "Easy holds here." Moments later, a barrage of bullets killed him on the spot. Nearly broken, Easy was reached by a relief force from Charlie Company, 5th Marines. Easy had held, at the cost of 90% casualties. Daylight had also revealed a sobering fact. The Americans were surrounded. At a key mountain pass, the men of Fox Company had been under attack for 4 days. As a relief force climbed Fox Hill, they were overcome by the sight. Many hundreds of dead Chinese soldiers. Soon, they passed fallen Marines. Men bowed their heads in prayer, recalled Lieutenant Joe Owen. The pass secure, one objective remained: to get out of Chosin alive. "So you'll be retreating?" asked a journalist of Division Commander General O.P. Smith. "Retreat? Hell," his legendary reply. "We're just attacking in another direction." From around the reservoir, The men were to blast their way 64 miles to safety at the port of Hung Nam. Fresh from battle, Marines fell into parade formation, singing the Marine hymn. They were bloodied, gaunt, and greasy, but their spirit lived. The frozen chosen, they called themselves. The chosen few. The survivors of the Korean War's most epic battle marched to the port of Hung Nam to ship south and fight another day. But once again, they were not alone. Trailing the Americans were thousands of North Korean refugees, having trekked through deep snow and carrying their every possession in hopes they would be saved. The overpowering human struggle touched the American heart. And so, in a humanitarian mission for the ages, nearly 200 ships clogged Hung Nam's harbor, evacuating every Korean refugee that they could carry. Among the last ships to anchor was the merchant marine freighter SS Meredith Victory, designed to carry 12 officers and 35 crew. With no food or water, refugees filled all available space. As the Meredith Victory headed for open water midday on December 23rd, the freighter, built for 50, was carrying 14,000. During the first night at sea, the count became 14,001. A baby had been born. Soon, a second, third, and a fourth. Then, on Christmas Day, a fifth. Speaking Little Korean, the Americans gave them nicknames, Kimchi 1 through 5. Today, 1 million South Koreans living in freedom trace their lineage to the 100,000 refugees rescued by the Americans in what was remembered as the miracle of Christmas.
Please help me welcome United States Marine veterans from the epic Battle of Chosin Reservoir 75 years ago.
Richard, you were surrounded and outnumbered 5-1 in temperatures well below zero. How did you make it out?
Well, luck, yes. Mostly luck.
Mostly luck. Well, I'll take luck over skill any day. Well, you did it, and you did it with honor. Johnny, what do you want Americans to remember about the Korean War?
The Chosin Reservoir battle.
Yeah.
I fought in 50 battles, different ones that got different stories, but the Chosin is the one they want to hear.
As we heard in the story, in the aftermath of the battle at the Chosin, the Americans evacuated some 100,000 North Koreans. Joining us here on stage, we are honored to welcome surviving veterans of the Ship of Miracles, Burley Smith, and traveling to join us all the way from Korea, born aboard the Meredith Victory 75 years ago this Christmas. Please welcome Kimchi number 1, Yang Young Son. Burley, how did it feel to be part of one of the greatest humanitarian missions in all of history?
Well, essentially, it's a feeling of tremendous pride to have been part of the ship. I was extremely proud of the way our 48 crew members went into Hung Nam after the Chosin Reservoir debacle. And we were the next to the last American ship, freighter, commercial ship, to leave Hung Nam. They said to Captain LaRue, will you take civilians, North Korean enemy civilians? And Captain LaRue said, of course. So we began loading early in the morning on the 22nd of December, loaded all night, and the next morning we finished loading all 5 of our hatches and all 3 decks in each hold with Korean civilians.
Yang Young Son, you were born aboard Burley's ship.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to say to him and all of the Americans who saved your family?
I'm the first
of total, 5 miracle babies who were born on the last freedom vessel during the Hungnam evacuation. And I came here in order to express my sincere gratitude to my lifesaver, who is Mr. Burley Smith. I hope much more people will learn through the history of the Choshin and the Hungnam evacuation the value of the family, humanism, freedom.
An incredible reunion 75 years later. Once again, heroes of the miracle of Christmas.
Wells Fargo honors the heroes of the miracle of Christmas in Korea 75 years ago.
Okay, folks, let's start. That was a really impressive video, and you look great in a dinner jacket, too.
I think Yang Kung was a better speaker than I.
Well, you held up your end, Burley. So Burley and I are going to have a little discussion. And for the record, while we are both named Smith, we are not related. I wish I shared Burley's DNA because I'd probably live a lot longer. But just amazing that you are, in fact, turning 97, you said? Very shortly. Just incredible. So, Burley, well, you're familiar with these questions. You've done a lot of interviews, and so this is old hat. So this should be a very comfortable experience for you. And we'll start with a nice, gentle start. If you could start by telling us about your early life and education and what led you to attend the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, and how you came to serve as junior third mate aboard the SS Meredith Victory.
I was the eldest of 5 children. My dad, during the war, went through Sheepshead Bay and came out as an ordinary seaman, sailed during the war with American Export Line, and did a lot of the convoys to Murmansk and the Mediterranean. And of course, by the end of the war, when I was 12 or 14 years old, I knew about what sailors did. We lived in Atlantic City, right on the coast, so in the morning walking to school, you'd see the detritus from the sunken ships that had been sunk during the week before, as the German submarines were having a wonderful time with the lights of Atlantic City showing up the vessels going by. So I knew all about the American Merchant Marine, got out of high school, couldn't afford to go to college because by that time Dad was back at his job with Kraft Cheese Company making a very small salary. And I couldn't afford to go to Rutgers where my more wealthy high school classmates were going. So I went up to Elizabeth, New Jersey, where I think a number of our friends here are from. And took the written examination with about 40 or 50 other fellows, managed to pass, and ended up, at that time, Kings Point still had 2 basic schools, one in San Mateo, California, the other one in Pass Christian down on the Gulf Coast. And I was lucky because I always felt San Mateo was a better choice of the 2. So I did my year at San Mateo and then ended up spending my sea year with American President Line, the first half of it doing a 6-month round-the-world trip on a C-3 cargo ship, the Marine Leopard. In those days, the war was just over. This was 1947. And many of the ports in the Far East that we touched, and in Europe, for example, Genoa was practically destroyed. So it took days to get a berth that we could use. Containers weren't going to be invented for another 20 years. So when it rained in Penang, we were stuck for a week, not able to work cargo. And we got to Bombay, and India was celebrating the independence from Britain. They had just declared independence, so nobody worked for a month, which was good fun because I ran the lifeboat as deck cadet. I got to run the lifeboat, take our crew ashore for a month. Then I was put on another, the American President line had just come out with a couple of new passenger ships, President Wilson and the President Cleveland. So I was a cadet on the Cleveland for a few months. And that was my career, really, that got me into the Merchant Marine.
Okay. Well, so you're a merchant mariner, and many of us here are merchant mariners, and we do love a sea story. So, but brief ones were on film, and the clean ones, right?
And I've always had a problem.
So I'm hoping what you can do is briefly sketch out some of the operations of the Meredith Victory in the early months of the war, when you get in theater, I suppose the military would say, that, you know, and the kind of cargo you were carrying, and a really scary typhoon. So can you tell us a little about that?
I had hoped to, I signed up with Moore McCormick because their run on the freighters was down to Latin America on the East Coast, Argentina and Brazil. And as a cadet, I had met some friends in both ports down there and loved to practice my Portuguese and my Spanish. So I applied for a third mate's job on one of their ships, and was, after 2 weeks driving a cab in Atlantic City waiting for my first assignment, I got a call and said, "You're going to the Meredith Victory, a freighter, a Victory ship, which is anchored in the mothball fleet in the James River in Virginia." And I'd heard about the mothball fleets, but didn't know what they were. And of course, they were just farms of World War II vessels that had been laid up because they were no longer utilized. And I arrived down there by train to find two of my other classmates, two engineers, part of the black gang, as we called them in those days. And we took about a week to strip off all the mothball coverings the ship had put on. The Meredith Victory had been lying there for about 2 years since she was laid up after the war. And we finally got her in shape and sailed empty around to the Oakland Army base. And we thought, whoops, this doesn't sound good because we're not heading for South America. And what we started loading were tanks, Sherman tanks and jeeps and army equipment, bridges and so forth. And finally, we sailed for Tokyo. And we knew something was wrong then because this wasn't the regular Moore McCormick business. And we arrived in Tokyo, anchored, and they took us alongside, took off a few of the miscellaneous pieces of cargo and put other stuff on board. And we lay there for about a week while MacArthur put together the Incheon invasion convoy. There were 18 of us, merchant ships, some British, mostly Americans, almost all. And MacArthur was up front on the troop transports with the rest of the brass. And we sailed. Nobody knew in our area where we were going. We were the last ship on the starboard queue of 6 ships. And we didn't know where we were going until we got clear of the port, and the captain was told then. But we heard later that the girls in the bars in Yokohama had all known exactly where we were going. It took us about 2 days to get around the bottom of Japan and Korea, and we did the Incheon invasion. But the evening before, we were coming up, all 18 of us behind MacArthur, coming up the west coast of Korea. And this terrific typhoon, Kizio, was coming up from the China Sea. And the Missouri and another convoy of actual warships was coming to join us for the invasion. But they were diverted because of the typhoon. We, for some reason, didn't get the word. We were merchant ships. And as I came on watch at 8 o'clock at night, we were to land on the beaches at 6 o'clock the next morning. So we're just about to enter the harbor to come into Incheon. And the storm hit us. And as I was taking over from the second mate at 8 o'clock at night, We'd been rolling all day because the sea and the wind were coming up from behind us on our port quarter. And with all the tanks and heavy weight up on the deck, of course, the ship was rolling like stink. It was terrible. We were doing 30, 40-degree rolls. And as I was taking over from the second mate, he and I were standing out on the starboard wing. I'm talking too much, I know. But we rolled over, and the tanks, which were secured by chains, began to break their chain lashings and began to fall down to the low side, starboard side of the ship. And at that point, we just hung over there, and it looked like we might be going over. The mate and I had to grab vertical stanchions to avoid falling off the bridge wing into the sea. But we came back very slowly, and by this time, the skipper had crawled up, Captain LaRue had crawled up from his cabin, and he was a cool character. This is the captain who's now been proposed for sainthood by the Catholic Church. He was a wonderful seaman and a terrific guy in many ways. He got up to the bridge and stood there. It's completely dark, of course. The wind is howling, and we're wondering if the next wave is going to be our last. And the skipper just stood there for a minute and told me to put her full ahead, and he told the wheel to come hard left. And we came around broadside to these. The waves were 50, 55 feet high because our bridge wing height of eye was that way. And each wave was at eye height up on the bridge. And he turned us around and we headed back out into the sea, which of course saved our necks because that way was a much more stable run. We, after the typhoon passed, the next 3 or 4 hours, we turned around, rejoined the invasion for the 6 o'clock the next morning. And the rest of your question was?
Well, I think you covered it, and it's okay. You took your time. Father Sinclair specifically asked for a sea story, so we no, he wrote to me about this days ago. So you know, and I think it underscores the professionalism and the skills of yourself, of course, but especially of Captain LaRue, was a seasoned mariner. This.
Absolutely was. He'd been a regular skipper with Moore McCormick out of the Pennsylvania school ship. That's where he'd gone to school. And he'd been with Moore McCormick for a number of years, done a lot of merman's convoy runs during the war. So he was an old salt, but very soft, very easygoing, never a swear word. And those of you who've gone to sea know what you captains are like when you...
Oh, okay. So perhaps you could tell us or describe the scene at Hungnam Harbor when you first saw really the refugees on the piers and wharves. What were your initial thoughts?
After Incheon, which was, of course, the 15th of September, we spent our time ferrying back and forth from Incheon to Yokohama and Busan, and even Hungnam after the Marines got as far north as Chosin Reservoir, just ferrying war goods into Korea. We were doing this for about 3 months. And finally, we were discharging avgas, aviation fuel, from our ship that we'd picked up in Japan. And we were unloading it in Busan, or Busan as we call it now. And we were halfway through discharging it all when we got word that we had better get up to Hungnam. And we said, well, we're not quite finished. We've got about 400 or 500 tons of drums of aviation fuel in number 2 and 3 holds. And the Army said, don't wait, leave it, get up there. So we took off from Busan, ran up, took about a day and a half to get up to Busan. It's about 400 miles. And arrived up there at Wonsan Harbor entrance, which was, they've said it was the hugest minefield ever laid. It was really tremendous. And some classmates of ours from Kings Point had been in the Navy sweeping a channel so we could get into the dock by that time. And they had marked the dock with these little fenders that we use on small sailboats now. So you can imagine getting in bad visibility with a couple of white fenders, so nobody to shuffle you in. So we got in. They put us alongside another victory ship, the Nor Cuba, an American vessel, because there was no dock space available. I think we were the last, next to the last ship, probably to leave Hung Nam. Pardon me. But we got in, we anchored first. And then the idea was that we were to take, the reason they'd sent us up was to take out war materials, tanks and equipment. But we could see the Chinese at night on the hills, and the U.S. Air Force, they weren't the Air Force in those days, it was the Air Corps, I guess. They were strafing and napalming the Chinese who were on the hills all around the harbor. So we sat at anchor for just a night, I think, watching all this. And then the Army said, we're not going to have time to have you load any materials getting out of here. And presumably they said to Captain LaRue, how about taking, you could see on the docks, it was like New Year's Eve in Times Square, just a mass of refugees. And they all, it looked like a sort of very off-white group because they all were wearing winter gear. The weather, as we saw in one of these videos, was the coldest I've ever been. It was really a horrifically cold area. And we're at December 22nd by this time. So they said to us, will you take refugees? And LaRue, with no hesitation, presumably said, sure. So we began, our crew built platforms, probably about 10 or 12 feet out of wooden dunnage. We hooked it to the ship's gear and began loading these refugees. We would put the pallet over on the other side of the Nor Cuba, load the pallet with 12 or 15 refugees, bring it aboard, and put them down in the lower hold. All 5 hatches were being loaded. So we had a mate in each hold down in the bottom, and our job was simply to have the refugees back up against the sides of the wings down below until we had the area full. And then we'd put the steel beams across the top of the hatch and the hatch boards, and then start loading the tween deck. And then the next deck, there are 3 levels normally in the hold. And then finally the top deck, we didn't put the canvas on top of the hatch boards. In the old days, this is before containers, but it was very primitive. So we lay there from about midday on December 21st until midday the next day, loading these people. And it was just a steady stream all day, all night. And the remarkable thing about it was there was no noise from the crowd. If you can imagine, you've seen the pictures of all the people on the pier. There was no hustle, there was no bustle, there were no kids crying, and many of the women were carrying babies on their backs, but you never heard a child scream. The most remarkable thing. We got the ship full and then covered the main deck. You've seen pictures of what the main deck looked like. And then upped anchor about noon on the must have been the 22nd, and left. We were always sailing alone in those days, so we went back out through, if you can imagine, the thought everybody had was, if you hit one of the mines in this huge minefield, if you miss one of the little white markers going out with lifeboat capacity for about 100 people, it would have been incredible. But anyway, we got out and ran down the 300 or 400 miles to, we didn't know where else to go. And by this time, off the record, our radio, the only communication we had was a radio operator, an older gentleman, he must have been in his 40s. He had been drinking a lot too much, so we had to shackle him into his bunk by his ankles. That had been going on for about 4 or 5 days. This is off the record, all of you. And the only communication, you may have seen a picture of me somewhere on the flashing light. I was the only one who could communicate with anybody because I was just out of school and we all knew the Morse code. So we got out of the harbor, went down the coast. The skipper had no orders. They just said, we guess you better go south. And we sailed down, got to Busan, anchored, because we didn't know where else to go. And there was no way to ask them because we didn't have any radio. And they came out and they said, well, you can't stay here. We've got all sorts of refugees coming by land. And what you better do is get out of here, and we'll send you down to what became one of the big prison camps for the North Korean army. And they began piling refugees in there as well. So we sailed down, it was just about 30 or 40 miles to the island of Kojido, and anchored off the island. And in the morning, when you could see the island, there was no snow. It was still very, very cold, but these thousands of refugees smiled for the first time, because you can imagine all these people hadn't the faintest idea where they were going, what we were going to do with them. We might have thrown them all overboard just to clear the area. But for the first time, they smiled. They still weren't jabbering or talking much to each other. And two LSTs manned by Korean or Japanese, I never knew which, came alongside, one on each side, anchored next to us. And in about 4 hours, we discharged all these 40,000 people over the side. Just the bulwarks were about even. So they just climbed over our bulwark onto the LST. And then they went ashore, and they didn't know what to do with us. So finally, LaRue got the orders to go to Sasebo in Japan, which was about a 10-hour run. It was close by. And the next problem was that these 40,000 people had been locked down below with no water, no food, no light for 3 days.
Right?
14,000. They'd been locked down there long enough so that the filth was incredible. Urine wasn't a problem because we had drains in each of the holds and tween decks. But by the time we got over to Sasebo and had all the hatches opened, we had human feces in piles 4 feet high in each corner of each deck, and tween deck and lower hold. You can imagine what the ship smelled like. They wouldn't let us go ashore in Sasebo, of course, but they did send out lime. And with empty 55-gallon drums, we went down and by hand with our own crew shoveled all of this stuff out of 15 different decks where we had 60 piles.
Wow.
So that was the story.
We're going to go off the written questions. So one of the big questions is this moment when, you know, Captain LaRue says, okay, we're going to do this. And how is that communicated to the other officers and crew?
Virginia can tell you how that happened. Where's Virginia? Virginia's father was on the ship. And in fact, as all you sailors know, it's the chief mate who runs the ship. The skipper pops up onto the bridge once in a while during a watch and checks on where you are. But the guy who really runs all the operations with cargo and passengers and maintenance of the vessel is the chief mate. So whatever the captain wanted to get through to the mates would always be he would tell Dino Savastio, our chief mate, what he wanted, and Dino would tell us.
Okay, so we look forward to hearing more about the chief mate, maybe later today. And of course, he was a fellow King's Pointer as well.
He was a King's Pointer, and he and we were talking to Virginia this morning, he and our purser had a contretemps at one point. There was a strict order of seniority on the ship, and meeting, all the officers ate in the same dining room. And I haven't told the story often, but Virginia and I were talking about it this morning because she'd heard the story. If you sat in the wrong seat, you were in trouble. And apparently one night the purser must have sat down to dinner in the wrong seat at the captain's table. And I didn't hear about this until 2 or 3 years ago when one of my classmates, an engineer cadet, told me. And Dino apparently went over and said, this is where the captain and I sit. And
So one of the sad things about it was the chief mate who ran the ship, really, not the ultimate authority, but the guy who told us all what to do. Dino is never mentioned in any of the stories about the ship or what was done or the babies that were born. He was the midwife. He told us all what to do at each stage as we went along, and you never hear him mentioned in any of the histories. And yet he was the guy who ran the ship. I met him about 3 years later when I was the MSTS officer on active duty in the Navy. I was running Southampton port at that time, and Dino came in. He'd been promoted to captain of another more McCormick ship, and I went aboard expecting to have a great, hi, good to see you, how are things since. But he was a very strict, sort of reserved character. I don't know if he was at home or not. But he was the boss, and he ran the ship, really, and the skipper was there as the El Supremo, but that was it.
Okay, so we're running short on time, but there's a very important final question, which is, on a personal level, and your generation isn't known for gushing over the emotional impact of what you went through, but we're going to go there, Burley. So, how does this experience continue to affect you emotionally, both at the time and ever since? And what does it mean to you today to be part of what many call the Ship of Miracles?
Well, at the time, it was a great blow because the letters I was getting from my long-term girlfriend back in Atlantic City stopped about 2 months into our 6-month trip to Korea. Mm. And by the time I got home, she'd married the boy who lived next door. So it was a very sad denouement to the entire 6 months in the Far East. But the overwhelming feeling that I've had since then is incredible pride in the Koreans, the way they behaved, and the fact that you could have 30 or so thousand women and babies and old men jammed on a freezing cold pier, not knowing what was going to happen to them, with the lights of the Chinese fires in the background. There was never any panic. There was never any complaining. There was never any noise. They were quiet as mice. And I could never help thinking that if Dino Savastio's uncles, the Italians, or the French, or anybody else had been on the dock, and these numbers, there would have been complete chaos on the dock. But with the Koreans, it was absolute quiet and obedience. And of course, the sense, there was never any real, one or two of our crew, some of the older ones, did have trouble with ulcers and things like that acted up. But in general, there was a sense of complete confidence in the people that you were working with. Although there were, a bunch of us who were 20, 22 years old, and the rest of us, the skipper was only 34, I think, at the time. But you had complete confidence in the crew. And you knew that everything that was needed to be done was being done. So it was really routine, a lot of it. And pride, I think, both in the operation of our own people. And as I was telling somebody this morning, last week for a paper I was doing, when I went on to AI to see what they had to say about the merit of the victory, there was about 4 pages of very interesting history. And at the same time, there was another 4 pages telling about what was the name of the ship?
St. Louis.
The St. Louis. German flagship, most of you may know about it. But they made the comparison between what happened on the merit of the victory, where the U.S. government saved at least 100,000 Korean refugees. The comparison was made in AI by what happened under the Roosevelt administration just before the Second World War, when the German flagged ship picked up 900 Jewish refugees in Amsterdam, along with other passengers, came to Cuba to land these 900 refugees, and was refused by the Cubans. They wouldn't take them. So the ship came up to Miami and was right off Miami within sight of our shore. And Washington said, no, we won't take these refugees. So the skipper, the German skipper, had to take them back to Europe, where most of these refugees were reassimilated by the Nazis, and most of them ended up dying. And the comparison was made by AI, and what a wonderful thing it was that America acted as it did with these refugees, and what happened under the Roosevelt administration at that point. And I couldn't help compare it to the way we're acting today.
It's a powerful humanitarian story, and I can't help but observe that this is why we need a merchant marine, is not only to transport our military supplies, which we do, but also because, darn it, we're the good guys, and we're there to rescue people. And the merchant marine has done this many, many times. Burley, it is such a privilege and an honor to talk to you, and the absolute consistency of your story and your admiration of the Korean people is one of the things that makes this so powerful for me. So, sir, on that note.
I just add one thing, if I could, Josh. Barbara and I go back to Korea every couple of years, and every time we go back, we are received at every level without making any pre-announcements or anything. Their appreciation and their admiration of what was done for them by the Americans, by the forces, is just so remarkable.
So, Burley, we'd like to present you with this little token of our appreciation of today. We much appreciate being able to record and to save this story for history. I just point out we have a large Vietnamese community in Port Arthur, in Texas, and there's another story documented in the documentary "Finding the Virgo," about one of the Virgo, our LNG ship sailing between Indonesia and Japan, rescuing Vietnamese boat people during that time. It's a powerful, powerful story of our merchant marine being out there to assist those who are in need. So thank you so much, brother. Yes.
Thank you, Terry.